Welcome to There is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business for the past 28 years, since 1994. Today is Thursday. How's everybody doing out there? Are we getting more fit? Are we getting more well? Today's topic is, what is the science behind the final weeks of physique competition, and why does it work? Why do people do it? So I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover kind of where it came from, and then the science behind what does work and what doesn't work. So that's the topic of the day. Before I get to that, let me thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden at the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They currently have over 275 star reviews on Zillow and over 100 million sales between the two of them. They're the absolute best. They're grinders. They're fit. They work hard for you. Take advantage of the market. Now with interest rates coming up, it might be time to do something. So if you need their help, give them a call at 386-451-2412 or thegildengroup.com. So today's topic was asked by one of our listeners, and the question was basically they're doing a physique show of sorts, or they're getting ready for one, and they're doing some things that that's not common in dieting or common in working out, and they wanted to know what the science is behind it. In other words, what is the method to the madness? Is it just madness, or is there a method behind it? Basically, those are my words. They basically just wanted to know, so what is the science behind all this stuff we do for contest preparation? And so what she's referring to is basically what is called peak week, peak as in peaking, peak week, and bodybuilders, physique competitors of all sorts and variety, which I'll give you in a second, basically follow a regimen to get themselves as ready as they can be to be on stage. So when I first did a bodybuilding competition back in 1993-94, it was very different. There was bodybuilding, there was female bodybuilding, and I'm trying to think if there was even any bikini physique stuff then at the time. It may have been just beginning, but I don't think it was really coming into fruition yet. Eventually the physique stuff really took hold, and now that's the majority of physique competition. There's really hardly any bodybuilding left. On the female side, I hardly ever see any at all. And even on the male side, most of the physique competitions that are local and statewide, in other words, not professional, and I would guess, although I haven't been a part of it, so it's a total guess, that there's hardly any bodybuilding left. The majority is all men's physique. So the different competitions now, you have men's bodybuilding, then you have what they call classic physique, and that's kind of a step down of men's bodybuilding, meaning the emphasis is slightly different, not as big, more what they would call traditional physique bodies. I would argue those are the likes of, say, Arnold Schwarzenegger before he got too big, Frank Zane. I mean, really just classic Johnny Weissmuller, if you guys are old enough. Those classic physiques, kind of like they're looking for that, which, look good. It's just kind of weird. You have to separate these categories now to find it. And then men have what they just call men's physique, and those are basically board short guys, so they're wearing baggies and board shorts, and they're not really emphasizing their legs, I should say, and it's less poses, and it's very different. It's basically, do you look like a surfer? Do you have a good body type of thing? I believe those are even broken down a little bit more, but those are the main three for men. For women, it's even more diverse now. There is still a category of bodybuilding, but it's pretty obsolete. There might be one person in a local show tops, and then they have more women's classic physique, or it's women's physique, and that is a little more popular among the ladies, and it's a step down from bodybuilding. So the goal isn't to get as quote big, but more bigger than say women's physique, women's bikini, women's fitness. So maybe a little bit leaner than them, but not quite as big as bodybuilding. So I think they're trying to attract more, women into the sport that way. And then you have the biggest, which is basically essentially bikini. It's women's fitness. It's bikini, and there's some variances among those groups, which is when I go to these local shows. So naturally, in between what I do, I'm sitting there and I'm watching. It's very hard to decipher who's doing what. I mean, the different categories among the women's physique and the women's bikini and all this, it's like, well, what's the difference, and it's very hard to figure out. I know what they say is the difference. Like, one might be more towards muscularity and definition, the other might be more just basically appeal. They don't come out and say it, but sex appeal, what looks better. And so they break those categories up a little bit. They're extremely popular. It's the it's the women's bikini, essentially, and men's physique that are the most popular right now, and they've definitely overtaken bodybuilding by far. But in a nutshell, that's what they all are, and there's so many categories now, as I said. But basically, the competitor, whatever category they pick, wants to be their absolute best on stage. So there's basically 4 things that they look for. One of them is, say, muscularity, and again, depending on what you entered, there's either going to be more of an emphasis on muscularity or less of an emphasis on muscularity. The next is going to be definition, so how defined you are, what is your body composition. And again, depending on the category, that's either pushed more or pushed less, but it's still something that's looked at. The next is symmetry, and symmetry is basically, are you balanced? So like a nice symmetrical male body has bigger chest, bigger lats, and then the waist comes in nicely. We call that a nice symmetrical body, not just like right side to left side, but is the physique in proportion. So symmetry is a big part of it. That's the part I find one of the most appealing is in physiques, is like how symmetrical is it, because that's pretty trainable, and I think it's important. I don't think it's judged enough these days. Not to go on a tangent, but when you look at professional bodybuilding, it's a freak show, and it's almost like symmetry doesn't even matter anymore. These guys are just big like walls, literally brick shit houses, so to say. And so they're just big and muscular, and they could care less about any symmetry, and to me it's just gross. But then the final thing that's looked for in all these different physique competitions is your posing ability and your stage presence, and that is a big part of the program for sure. I mean, they really look at that a lot, which is kind of cool because that's something you can practice, your posing, and I do think there's an absolute art to it. And not to again go off on subjects that don't matter a lot, but you might find interesting. So one of the things that made Arnold Schwarzenegger so dominant in his field, and he won 7 Olympia titles before he retired, was he was such a phenomenal poser, and he had such great stage presence, better than his competitors by far. There were a couple shows where he, in many people's estimation, lost physique-wise. One of them was to Lou Ferrigno. People thought Ferrigno should have beat him, had a better body, and all that. I wouldn't say that that's true based on what I saw. I think Arnold still had him in the symmetrical department. Maybe Ferrigno had him in the other, maybe, but where Arnold killed him was in stage presence. I mean, he was so confident. He smiled. He really knew how to work the judges, and that's a part of it. People complain and say, well, that should matter, but it's like, well, if you read the rules, it absolutely says it matters. So You have to be able to do that. It shows confidence. So that's part of it. All right, so those are like the written rules. Now, the unwritten rules that they look at is, and I'm not going to get into the makeup and all that, because does that matter? Yes. I mean, it does, like for the ladies, and, and I even argue some of the men, get into that. I think it matters, right? Humans judge humans, so if there's something they like about that, they're going to judge it higher, but that's not really part of the physique stuff. That's just kind of like trying to sway judges or, have it go against you. But what really matters is your tan. What matters is your glow, and basically on stage level of definition, which is a large part shown by your hydration levels, your water levels. Okay, so that's, I think, mostly what the person who asked the question was getting at. Like, so why is it we manipulate this and that to bring about certain things, and does it work, essentially? So, that's really what we try to control during peak week. All right, so peak week can look pretty insane, depending on, again, what you're training for. But typically with peak week, there are different things that people do. Some people do a complete carb deprivation followed by a carbo load, and that means that they restrict carbohydrates very low for 3 days. They also train, there's different theories, but some train pretty darn hard for 3 days of carb depletion to sort of like get all the glycogen gone. So for those that don't know, glycogen is stored carbohydrate, and we can store up to 2,000 calories or 500 grams. So the idea is to deplete the carbohydrate via diet and training. And I'll get into what works. So that's one of the things that happens. And then 3 days of loading, and then essentially a day of stabilization, depending on when you started it. Like if it's a perfect 6th day, then the 7th day is the day that you're competing. So carbo load means taking in about 70% carbohydrates or more than you normally do, and eating mostly carbohydrates, very little protein, hardly any fat, and nothing that bloats the stomach. And the idea on that, okay, so here's the science behind carbo loading. That's to make the muscles as full as possible, because you are storing the carbohydrate in the muscle. That's the glycogen. So the idea is to keep the muscles as full as possible going up onto stage. Now, as a physiologist, I give that a plus. I say, yep, that's smart. That's a good thing to do. So that's why the carbohydrate manipulation is done, in part, okay? Physiologists, I already did explain it. Let me give you the research. The research says that you can carbo load without ever depleting. So in other words, that taking the carbs out of your body didn't do you any good except make you miserable for 3 days and piss off everybody around you, and probably steal some of your confidence because you feel so lethargic. And the super hard training is a waste of time on those 3 days. It's like you're just supposed to be maintaining. So research says on that, carbo load is to make the muscles full. It is silly, absolutely silly, to deplete beforehand. And you don't have to get carried away with the load too. Like, here's the reality. Don't change that much. That's what the physiologist is going to tell you. Don't change that much. There's no research behind it. Just little changes here or there can help. All right, but nothing supports these drastic, silly, basic things that people have done. And I'll wrap it up by telling where that came from. All right. So the next thing is on that. So that's making them full. The next thing is, how do you look as lean as possible? Well, I think everybody knows. I think everybody knows, whether they know it or not that they know. So much of that is hydration levels, sodium levels. So I can remember being in college, and I worked out a lot, and that was great. That's all good. I ate good, but nothing crazy, I just was a college kid that ate pretty good, ate healthy, ate a lot, worked out a lot. So unfortunately during those days, drank a lot, drank too much. And I can remember getting up hungover, looking in the mirror, being like, oh man, I am shredded. I am ripped, you know. And if anybody has not ever been through that, okay, just take my word for it. You don't have to go out and get hammered. Look at yourself in the mirror and be happy with the results, okay? Better ways to do it. But anyway, so yeah, water levels matter. So if you go up on stage and you are basically really bloated, and you're bloated because you're holding on to water, which is called extracellular fluid, that's not what we want. We want the water on the inside of the cells, pushing the muscles out. That helps with the fullness. We don't want it on the outside of the muscle, basically between the muscle and the skin. That's not what we want, because guess what? That's where you're going to see puffiness, we call that. Now, bodybuilders or non-bodybuilders, but guys that take steroids are very, very, very puffy. They're retaining a lot of fluid. So that's not a good thing, all right? That's not a good thing. So the reason why we want to look nice and striated up on stage, and striated means that you can see all of the muscle fibers. And in the case of the ladies in the bikini competitions and all that, they don't necessarily want to look striated, but they want to look lean. And they don't want to look like they have a lot of water over their muscles, making them look bloated and fat. That's not what they want. So the idea behind water, manipulating your hydration levels, is for that reason. You want to be a little bit dehydrated on stage, but also full at the same time. And let me tell you, that takes a lot of planning. Essentially, what happens is you drink a ton of water earlier in the week. You start to cut down your water intake to about 70% of what you normally do. A couple days before, you get it to like 50% of what you normally do. And then morning of, you take sips of water, but you don't chug water. I mean, it's really that simple. That's the right way. And then you get up on stage and you have the appropriate amount of water levels. That's what you want. Now, what gets advocated a lot for people, which is silly, is diuretics and things like that, which in amateur shows are illegal, but there's other ways to use diuretics. I mean, you could drink, and that's probably not wise. I mean, the whole thing behind all this is to be healthier. You know, that's what you're supposed to be doing. So if you have to fake it that much outside of your norm, is it really worth it to you as a sport? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, maybe here or there once in your life or something like that, or if you're getting paid for it maybe, but other than that, I don't think it's probably worth it. But everybody's got to make their own decisions on stuff like that. But what happens a lot is people will go out of the way with taking different sodium pills and different things like that to try to achieve a certain look, and it literally blows up in their face. So your body fights back, and you end up retaining a lot of water. So that's really not good, all right? That's not what you want to do. Again, you want to look your best on stage, but you can do that with properly manipulating your hydration levels and not doing anything super silly, like doing anything super diuretic the day before, or overloading yourself with a ton of fluids that you can't basically excrete morning of. That's not good. I like the idea of always knowing how much water you drink. For example, I try to drink at least a gallon of water a day. So for me, it would be easy. A few days out, I would cut that down to about 70% of it, and then maybe a half a gallon the day before. You don't want to get dehydrated. It's silly. You don't want to do that. So that's that part of it. Now, there's all this silly stuff about manipulating carbs for all this reason of hydration levels, and there really isn't any truth to that. So, like if you eat too much sugar, it's going to suck the water out of the cells and into the area between the muscles and the fat or the skin, which, same thing essentially. So carbohydrates give us energy, and when we're carb full, we do have more water because it means the muscles are full, but you're not going to look leaner because you're cutting out all of this sugar, not the week of. You're not going to do anything body composition wise the week of. It takes 3,500 calories to drop a pound. If you're depleting that during that week, that's not very smart. So your body kind of is what it is that week. So, really drastically manipulating your carbs or other macronutrients does not make a lot of sense. Again, I get the whole get full thing. I get the whole monitor your water levels properly and basically know your body. Don't take diuretics and all that or any supplements that try to replicate that. That's kind of silly. Don't chug a bottle of pickle juice day of and all these things. That is nauseating. But, I get that. But also understand that carbohydrates don't have a huge impact on hydration levels, and that's just one of those myths that gets pushed down from eons ago. And then the last thing with stage presence is tan and all that, and I hate that part of it, but it is a big part of it, and I can tell you that I went the first couple times, I did a master show in the last couple years, and I did it with more natural tanning stuff. I mean, it was still fake tan, but it was more natural. It wasn't as dark, and it impacted me, sadly. And then the last time I didn't, and that was like the big change, is I just used who the show people had, and I was dark, and it looks ridiculous when you get down to it, but it made a difference. So tanning and all that absolutely has an impact on the judges. I'm not advocating that. I think it's really silly what people do. It's like, dude, that is not you. Like, why are you painting this stuff on your body? That is not you. But that's just unfortunately the nature of the sport that you can't control. But, having said that, having a tan matters. I think the body definitely looks more lean and defined when it's more tan, of course. And it's just, unfortunately, for bodybuilding and all that, it goes to the extremes. All right, so now let me explain where it all came from. So I think out of all the sports known to man, bodybuilding might be the one with the least scientific backing, coming down from the old hand-me-down wisdom of my uncle used to do it, and it's been one of the toughest ones to try to change the people within the sport out of all of them. I would say it's the least, as far as my experience. I can only go by like the sports I've done. There might be other people that say, oh, no, I do this sport and there's hardly any science in it either. It's okay. But from my experience of the sports I've been involved in personally has been bodybuilding and then endurance sports such as triathlon and running. And I could tell you unequivocally that did not come out good, but anyway, you know what I mean? That no question about it, that bodybuilding, very little science among the people that do it, and then triathlon is loaded with science, whereas there's so many studies done, and there's studies done in bodybuilding, but the people who follow it, the people that actually do it, like are really kind of science trendy in multi-sport. Like they really read the articles, they know what's going on, and they're right for the most part. Like they're training pretty correctly. A lot of them can overtrain and overdo it and try to do what the pros do, but that's not following science. That's just, not knowing themselves very well. But in bodybuilding, it's like science is one thing and people are still doing another. And that's just been going on because essentially the leaders of the sport, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, from the Muscle Beach in California, and again, I like Arnold, but he'd be the first to tell you, it's like, I don't know if he would or not, but he is not a fitness expert. He is a retired bodybuilder who became a politician. That's what he is, and he's a good communicator. So, they trained a certain way because they thought it was right. And they also took a lot of drugs. So they got huge. And, then the way they train gets passed down. It's like, well, if Arnold does this, this must work. And then everybody starts training that way. Everybody from the Muscle Beach era, and there was a lot of them. So all of that set a huge, huge tradition of how to train. And then people have been following it for years, and that's just the way it goes. There's not a lot of science in a lot of what they do. There's just not. I mean, we know how muscles grow now, and essentially if you follow what they did without drugs, you would be overtrained and you would not grow at all, because they put way too much emphasis on volume and daily training. There's just no way you're going to get bigger and stronger without extra help. But people do, and they still do. And it's hard as a physiologist to even tell people, because they're going to be like, well, what do you know? Arnold's big. It's like, okay. So it's really hard to explain that to people. So that same logic just gets carried over into physique competition. So, they do it a certain way. They're drinking pickle juice before they go up on stage, or, they're taking sodium tablets to suck all of the water out, and they're doing all this stuff, so it must work. And it just gets carried over. And then if you're doing any coaching at all, it's hard for you to go against that unless you're really confident in your science. And what I mean is, there's a lot of pseudo coaches out there that are not physiologists or whatever, but that are helping people, and they may think they're doing what is best, but a lot of times, they don't have the complete grasp on what the science is, and they don't have the confidence to question what other people are doing, because those other people might be, stars in the physique world. They might look really, really good. And so, that's how it all gets carried on, but there's not a lot of science behind it. And a term I've used over and over, I use it in my book and I use it all the time, is you don't ask the racehorse how it got fast, right? So just pretend the bodybuilder can't speak, and just then ask, the science, well, how did he get big versus them, because they're going to know better, right? The science knows. There's really only one way we grow muscles, through hypertrophy. And that is, the muscles have to be broken down, stimulated more than they've ever been stimulated, fed appropriately, and they're going to grow. And too much training is just going to cut into that muscle mass growth. So there is a true science behind it. They don't know that. They just think, well, if I do 20 sets of chest, my chest is going to get bigger, So that's where it all comes from. And then, just to summarize, the science behind it is, if you're going to do physique competition, number one, have the genetics. It takes a body type to do it. So have the genetics. I can't state that enough. You cannot turn an ectomorph into a mesomorph, or vice versa. You just can't. You can absolutely get in the best shape of your life body composition wise, but if you're going to do a competition, make sure that you have the genetics for that, okay? Number two, have the solid physique before you're going to compete. In other words, have a nice level of muscularity. Don't get too huge if you're a guy or a girl, before you decide it's time to strip down. There are bodybuilders that will lose up to 50 pounds for a competition. Is it really worth it to go through 9 months of the year 50 pounds overweight, and then 2 to 3 months out of the year, depending on how long you keep that off, in your best shape? I don't think so. There's a few different bodybuilders that I really like, and one of them used to say, Frank Zane, that he never wanted himself to get more than 8 or 10 pounds overweight in the off season, because he didn't want to be overweight most of the year. And to me, that's very sound advice. So stay close to the competition level you want to be. If you have to drop a lot of weight, you might want to consider, doing something else or doing it a different way. So stay close to it. But when it is time to strip, it's going to be just like everything else. There's no truth to the no carb, eliminating sugar, all this. No, you're losing weight. So you do a subtle, I almost said drastic, a subtle cutback of what you're eating, calorically speaking, until you get down to the leanest you can be. That's what you do. It doesn't change because you're a quote bodybuilder or whatever. You diet down, calorically speaking, keeping a pretty balanced diet of 50 to 60% carbs and the rest of it in fat and protein, essentially evenly split. And you do it like you normally would, and you cut back until you're slowly losing about 2 pounds per week, so you get your most ideal body composition you can be in. And then peak week or peak 2 weeks, whatever it takes, then you start working on that tan a little bit. You start thinking about your hydration levels, and essentially you let it rip. If it's more complicated than that, you're making it more complicated, or you're listening to somebody who's making it more complicated than that. But that's really what it comes down to. I think it's a great topic, and I appreciate it, and I hope it helps. And until next time, be max fit, be max well, year round, be healthy, be fit.